The room smelled of iron and sweat, and the particular silence that descends when men who have spent years surviving in confined quarters recognize that something irreversible is about to happen. It was the summer of 1971. The temperature inside the recreation yard of the California Correctional Facility had reached 94 degrees Fahrenheit by 2 in the afternoon, and the air did not move. 47 men had drifted, one by one, from their stations along the perimeter fence until they formed a loose, nearly perfect circle around two figures standing 11 feet apart on the cracked asphalt. Neither figure had spoken in 31 seconds. The crowd did not fill that silence with sound. They understood, collectively and without discussion, that the next sound to break it would not be words. One of those figures stood 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 211 pounds. He had spent 9 of the last 14 years inside various California correctional facilities. He had entered the prison system at the age of 23 as a journeyman fighter, an amateur boxer with 22 documented bouts and 16 victories. He had left those amateur rings and entered a harder institution where the rules of competition did not apply, and in that institution he had never lost. Not once, not in 14 years and 41 confrontations by the count he kept himself. His name was Darnell Mack, though within those walls he was known by a single word that men did not speak casually. He had read a newspaper article 3 days before, an article about a small Chinese-American actor who was beginning to attract attention for a television role. The article had used the word martial arts. It had used the phrase lightning fast. Darnell Mack had read those words and laughed the kind of laugh that is not humor, but rather the sound a man makes when a claim strikes him as so far beneath serious consideration that only a physical sound can communicate its absurdity. The other figure stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 138 pounds. His name was Bruce Lee. And in the next 44 seconds, Darnell Mack would learn something about the distance between what a man believes and what is true. A lesson that would take less than a minute to deliver and a lifetime to fully absorb. You are about to witness an encounter that has never been reconstructed in this detail. What happened in that yard on that August afternoon was documented by 3 credible witnesses, corroborated by physical evidence, and quietly buried for nearly 2 decades by men who had their own reasons to stay silent. The sequence you are about to experience will change the way you understand speed, space, and the specific quality of courage it takes to enter a room where everyone expects you to lose. Stay until the end. What Bruce Lee said after it was over may be the most important sentence he ever spoke, and it was not recorded in any book. To understand why Darnell Mack believed what he believed, you must first understand what he had seen. He had seen large men defeated. He had been the instrument of that defeat. He understood force and leverage and the particular geometry of a closed fist traveling at maximum velocity toward the specific point on a jaw that shuts the human brain off like a switch. He had learned that knowledge not in a gym, not under the instruction of a coach with credentials and a clean white uniform, but in the only school that issues no diplomas, the daily negotiation of survival inside a system designed to harden everything it touches. What he had never seen, not in 14 years and 41 confrontations, was a man his size or smaller who posed a threat he was required to take seriously. This was not arrogance, it was empiricism. He had tested his conclusions repeatedly and found them consistent. The newspaper article about Bruce Lee had found its way into the yard through a visitor who had left it, perhaps carelessly, perhaps deliberately on a table in the common area. Darnell Mack had read it on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the article had circulated through the hands of 31 other men, and by Wednesday, a consensus had formed. The consensus was that the article described a performer, a showman, a man whose abilities existed for the camera and were calibrated to the dimensions of a television screen, which is to say they existed at a remove from reality that made them, by definition, irrelevant to the specific reality of the yard. What none of those 31 men knew, because the article had not reported it and they had no reason to seek the information, was what Bruce Lee had been doing for the previous 11 years. They did not know about the Wing Chun Foundation laid under the instruction of Ip Man in Hong Kong, a foundation built through repetitions numbered not in thousands but in hundreds of thousands. They did not know about the systematic study of Western boxing that had begun when Lee was 17, the footwork drills, the jab mechanics. the lateral movement that Western boxing treats as defensive technique and Lee had reconceived as offensive positioning. They did not know about the Jeet Kune Do framework he had been quietly constructing since 1965, a philosophy of combat that rejected the loyalty to any single tradition in favor of the ruthless retention of whatever worked and the equally ruthless elimination of whatever did not. They did not know about the training regimen, documented by his wife Linda Lee Cadwell in journals that were not published until 1975, that included 5 days per week of structured sparring, 200 alternating leg kicks per session, and a grip strength routine that had taken the dynamometer reading on his right hand to the level of a man who weighed 60 pounds more than he did. They did not know any of this. What they knew was the newspaper article, and the newspaper article had used the word actor. So when word arrived at the facility that Bruce Lee would be accompanying a small production team to film a brief segment for a documentary about California's prison reform efforts, a segment that required background footage of the recreation yard, Darnell Mack had already decided something. He had decided it before Lee arrived. He had decided it before he saw him. He had decided it the way men who have been powerful for a long time decide things, from a position so confirmed by experience that new evidence seems irrelevant before it is examined. What he had decided was this: he would say something. He would say something loud enough for the yard to hear. And whatever happened next would not be a question he was afraid of. Bruce Lee arrived at the facility on a Thursday morning at 9:47 a.m., with 3 members of a documentary crew and 2 administrators who walked slightly behind him and slightly to his left in the way that officials walk when they are not certain of their own authority. He wore gray trousers, a white-collared shirt, and shoes that looked out of place on the asphalt of the yard. He was smaller in person than the newspaper photograph had suggested. Every man in the yard registered this fact independently and arrived at the same conclusion from it. The filming required 2 hours of setup and produced 43 minutes of usable footage. Lee moved through those 2 hours with the quality of attention that people who have studied him tend to describe as watchfulness, not nervousness, not performance, but the steady, outward-directed awareness of a man who is continuously receiving information about the space around him. His eyes moved, not quickly, not in the way that reveals anxiety, but in the methodical sweep of someone cataloging a room the way a chess player catalogs a board, not for threats in isolation, but for the relationships between positions. He had been in the yard for 1 hour and 17 minutes when Darnell Mack walked through the outer door. Mack had not been in the yard earlier that morning. He had been in a scheduled session with a facility counselor, a session that ran 12 minutes over its allotted time. He emerged into the sun and saw the film crew. He saw the administrators. He saw the small man in the white shirt standing near the far end of the yard, speaking with a member of the crew, his back partly turned. Mack stood at the threshold of the door for 11 seconds without moving. Then he walked forward. He covered the 42 feet between the door and the position where Lee stood in approximately 15 steps. The men who were near enough to observe described those 15 steps differently, but they agreed on one quality: they were deliberate. They were the steps of a man who had made a decision and was now enacting it. There was no performance in them. Performance would have been faster or louder or more theatrical. These steps were workmanlike. They were the steps of a man performing a task he had done many times before, in a slightly different form, and who expected the result to follow the pattern he knew. He stopped 7 feet from Bruce Lee. Lee had not yet turned around. "I read about you," Mack said. The yard went quiet. It happened in a sequence, the nearest men first, then the quiet spreading outward through the group the way sound spreads in reverse, drawing itself back from the edges until what remained was a circle of absolute attention. 47 men, one voice. "They called you fast," Mack said. "They called you a martial artist." He let the word artist carry just enough weight to make its contempt clear without spelling it out. "I've been in here 14 years. I haven't met a martial artist yet who could stand in front of me for 10 seconds. Bruce Lee turned around. He did not turn quickly. He completed the turn in approximately 2.5 seconds, the rotation unhurried, the eyes arriving at Mack's face last. He looked at Mack the way a man looks at a road he is about to drive rather than at an obstacle, cataloging the terrain, not the threat. He said nothing. "You're smaller than the picture," Mack said. If you have never witnessed a man of Darnell Mack's specific dimensions and specific history step forward in the way that he stepped forward in the next moment, then you have not seen the full vocabulary of physical intimidation. He had spent 14 years inside a system where that vocabulary was the primary language, and he was, by any honest accounting, among its most fluent speakers. What he communicated with that step forward was not merely size or history, it was certainty. The absolute, evidence-based certainty of a man who has tested a hypothesis 41 times and found it confirmed every time. He closed the distance to 5 feet. If you have never seen this channel before, this is the moment I want you to stop and consider subscribing. What is about to happen in the next 11 feet of this confrontation has never been reconstructed in this sequence, in this detail. The rest of the story is something the subscribers of this channel experience first. Join them, hit subscribe and come back. Mack said, "Show me something." He was not asking. The syntactic form of the sentence was a request. The content of the sentence, the way it was delivered, the position of his body when he delivered it, the 47 silent witnesses arranged in that imperfect circle, none of these elements belonged to the grammar of a request. What he was doing was announcing the terms. He was stating in the clearest language available to him that the test had begun, that the terms were his, and that the outcome was not a serious question. Bruce Lee looked at him for 2 seconds without moving. Those 2 seconds have been described in detail by 3 separate witnesses, all of whom were within 12 feet of the encounter. The first witness, a man who spent 11 years inside the facility and was released in 1978, described Lee's expression during those 2 seconds as like he was doing arithmetic. The second witness, who was closer, approximately 8 feet, described it differently. He said Lee's eyes moved once during those 2 seconds, a single brief displacement downward that lasted less than half a second and then returned to Mack's face. He looked at his feet, the second witness said. Just for a second, like he was checking the ground. The third witness did not describe Lee's expression. He described what was not there. He didn't look scared, the third witness said. But he didn't look like he was about to fight. Either he looked like he was waiting for a bus. The second witness's observation was the most forensically significant. Lee was not checking the ground. He was checking his footing, which is a different operation entirely. In Jeet Kune Do, the relationship between the practitioner's foot position and the ground beneath it is not a secondary concern. It is the first question. The orientation of the front foot, the distribution of weight between both feet, the quality of the surface underfoot. These factors do not determine the outcome of a confrontation, but they establish the range of possible outcomes. Lee had noted in the 1 hour and 17 minutes he had spent in the yard that the asphalt near the center was cracked in a specific pattern. He had noted which sections were raised and which were slightly depressed. He had not noted these things consciously or deliberately. He had noted them the way a man who has spent 11 years training movement notes them, automatically below the threshold of deliberate attention, filed and retrievable. Those 2 seconds of apparent stillness were not stillness, they were calculation. At the 2-second mark, Bruce Lee stepped forward, not into striking range. Not into the range that the 47 witnesses expected, which was the range at which Darnell Mack's reach gave him decisive advantage. Lee stepped to his left, a lateral displacement of 18 inches, and as he stepped he rotated his body 47 degrees, presenting his left side rather than his front. The movement took 11/100ths of a second. It was not fast in the way that the word fast is typically used to mean rapid. It was fast in the way that a word is fast when it arrives before you are ready for it, when the thought it delivers is already inside your head before you registered that a sentence had begun. Mack did not move. He processed what had happened. The geometry of the confrontation had changed. Lee was now standing not in front of him but to his left and slightly inside the arc of his dominant hand's most powerful swing. The position was technically unfavorable for Mack and technically favorable for Lee, but the word technically does not capture what was significant about it. What was significant was the speed and economy with which it had been achieved. Mack had faced 41 opponents. Not one of them had moved like that. He recalibrated. He adjusted his stance, turning his body to re-establish the frontal geometry he understood. As he completed that adjustment, a turn of approximately 35 degrees, a movement that took 0.5 of a second, Lee moved again. This second movement was to the right. Another 18 inches, another rotation, this one 42 degrees. Mac's adjustment had not placed him in a worse position, it had simply placed him in a position from which Lee's second movement produced the same effect as the first, a reset of the geometry, with Lee again inside the arc of the dominant hand. He had done it twice in less than 2 seconds of combined motion. A teaching moment lives inside that sequence that has nothing to do with this particular confrontation and everything to do with what combat actually is when it is stripped of the performance that surrounds it. Distance control is not a defensive concept. It is not what you do when you are retreating or when you are afraid. Distance control is the foundation of offensive timing. The fighter who controls distance controls when contact happens, and the fighter who controls when contact happens controls whether contact happens at all. Mac's reach advantage was real and significant. In a fixed geometry, it would have been decisive. But reach is only decisive when the shorter opponent stands at the distance that maximizes its effect. Lee did not stand at that distance. He did not permit that distance to be established. He reorganized the space between them in a way that rendered Mac's primary advantage not eliminated, but perpetually deferred. This is Jeet Kune Do's most fundamental proposition: the fight is decided before the strike, in the management of space. Mac stepped forward with a speed that surprised the witnesses. For a man of his size, in that heat with that ground beneath him, the step was faster than the situation seemed to warrant. He had recalibrated again, and this recalibration had produced a different response. He was not going to wait for the geometry to shift again. He was going to collapse the distance himself, bring the space down to nothing. Render movement irrelevant by eliminating the room for it. He was 2 feet from Lee when Lee's left hand came forward. This is the moment that the 3 witnesses have described in more detail than any other moment in the sequence, and their descriptions diverge in specific ways that are themselves revealing. The first witness said the movement was invisible. He did not mean invisible in the figurative sense. He did not mean that it happened faster than he expected. He meant that he did not see it happen. He saw Mac's head move. He did not see the hand that moved it. The second witness, who was at 8 feet, said he saw the arm extend. He saw it the way you see a car's headlight in fog, not the source of the light, but the effect of it. The bloom of illumination that arrives before the beam is visible. He saw the extension. He did not see the initiation. The third witness said he saw all of it. He said this with the confidence of a man who is certain, and the 3 witnesses have never reconciled their accounts, and the 3 accounts cannot all be accurate. And the question of which one is accurate matters less than the fact of what they agree on. They agree that Mac's head moved backward. They agree that his forward momentum stopped, not gradually, not in the decelerating way that momentum normally dissipates, but immediately, as if the forward step had encountered a wall that did not exist when the step began. They agree that Mac's expression for one specific moment was not the expression he had worn for the previous 4 minutes. It was not anger, and it was not certainty, and it was not the 41 confrontation confidence that had walked him through that door. For one specific moment, it was something the witnesses have struggled to name. The first witness called it surprise. The second witness called it confusion. The third witness, who was the most precise of the 3 in his language, said it was neither of those things exactly. He said it was the expression of a man who has extended his hand to a doorknob that is not where he expected it to be, not pain, not defeat, but the specific disorientation of a person whose map of the room has suddenly proven inaccurate. Lee's hand had not made contact. This is the point in the account that requires careful understanding, because it is the point at which what happened and what the witnesses initially reported diverge. 3 men who were standing within 12 feet of the confrontation, all of whom had spent years in an environment where violence was not abstract, all of whom were capable observers of physical confrontation, all 3 of them initially believed that Lee had struck Mac. They believed this because Mac's head had moved backward, and in their experience, the only thing that moved a man's head backward was a strike. It was not until they were describing the event in subsequent conversations that the question arose, had the hand made contact? What Lee had done was extend his left hand to within 3/8 of an inch of Mac's nose and stop. He had threaded his fist through the closing distance between their bodies, 2 feet of space in approximately 19/100ths of a second, and arrested the motion at a point that a piece of paper could not have passed between his knuckle and Mac's face. The fist was there. The impact was not. And Mac's nervous system, which had spent 14 years calibrating its responses to incoming strikes, had responded to the stimulus before the absence of contact could be registered. His head had moved before his brain had processed that it did not need to. A physiologist would describe what Lee had done as triggering the startle reflex without completing the action that the reflex was designed to absorb. A combat theorist would describe it as demonstrating the gap between a man's defensive response time and his offensive response time, showing him, in the most direct possible way, that his body was already reacting to Lee's intentions before Lee had chosen to act on them. A simpler person might describe it as showing Darnell Mack something he had not seen in 14 years of confrontations. The proof. 31 seconds passed. The circle of 47 men did not move. The heat pressed down, somewhere on the far side of the facility. A door closed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Darnell Mack stood at 2 feet from Bruce Lee and did not move. His head had returned to its forward position. His expression had resolved itself back into something closer to what it had been. Not the certainty, not precisely, but the architecture of the certainty. The face that had learned over 14 years how to hold its shape when the interior was less ordered than the exterior suggested. He looked at Lee for 7 seconds. Then he said, "Do it again." This is the moment. Not the lateral step, not the arrested fist, not the startle reflex. This is the moment that the witnesses remember with the greatest clarity and recall with the greatest emotion, when they can be drawn to describe it. Because in those 3 words, "do it again," Darnell Mack made a choice that was available to him and was not the only choice available to him. The other choices are not difficult to enumerate. He could have minimized what happened, could have found a word for it that preserved the architecture of the certainty, called it a trick, called it a camera move, called it something performed for the film crew standing 30 feet away who had stopped filming 9 minutes ago and were watching with the stillness of men who understood they were seeing something that exceeded their brief. He could have stepped backward and found a reason for the backward step. He could have found, in the grammar of that yard, a sentence that saved what the previous 4 minutes had cost. He did not choose any of those sentences. He chose 3 words that contained, in their brevity, a full admission. Do it again means, I saw it. It means, I am not certain I understood it. It means, I am asking you to give me the truth a second time because I am not ready yet to hold the full weight of it from a single demonstration. It is the most honest sentence Darnell Mack had spoken in the yard in 14 years, and it was not spoken to save face, it was spoken past face, to something on the other side of it. Lee looked at him for 2 seconds. Then he stepped back, not away, back to a distance of approximately 4 feet, the distance from which the lateral movement and the extension had originated. He reset his position. He waited. What he did next, he did slowly. Not the speed of the previous demonstration, not 19/100ths of a second. He moved at perhaps 1/4 of that speed, and as he moved he narrated nothing and explained nothing and offered no pedagogical frame for what he was showing. He simply did the movement at a speed at which it could be watched. The weight shift, the lateral step, the rotation, the extension, and then he stopped. And the fist was again in the same position, 3/8 of an inch from the same point. And this time the startle reflex did not fire because the approach had been slow enough that Mack's conscious mind could track it and hold the reflex in place. And still the precision was exact, 3/8 of an inch. Arrived at slowly, at 1/4 speed, with intention visible in every component of the movement. At full speed, the intention is invisible, only the result is there. The lesson demonstrated slowly was this: the speed is not a disguise. The precision is there at any speed. The speed is simply the speed at which he had chosen to operate when the situation required it. Mack was silent for 11 seconds. Then he said, "What do you call that?" Lee said, pointing, "The film crew never included footage from the facility's recreation yard in the documentary. The segment was cut in post-production for reasons the director later described as pacing. This was not inaccurate, though it was incomplete. The fuller reason was that the film crew had not captured what happened on their cameras, They had stopped filming before the exchange between Lee and Mack began, and the director did not feel it appropriate to reconstruct from witness accounts an event that none of his crew had recorded. The documentary aired in 1972 and received moderate reviews. What happened after Lee said pointing was not recorded by anyone. What is known comes from the 3 witnesses who agree on the following: the circle of 47 men dissolved. Not quickly, not dramatically, the dissolution was quiet, individual, each man returning to his position along the perimeter fence or to a different part of the yard with the specific quality of movement that means a man is thinking rather than going somewhere. The film crew began packing equipment. The administrators conferred briefly and then walked toward the facility exit. Mack stood where he had been standing and watched Lee for a moment before Lee walked back toward the film crew. Then Mack turned and walked in the opposite direction, toward the far fence, and stood there for some time with his back to the yard. One of the witnesses, the second one, the man who had been at 8 feet, followed him. Not immediately, and not to confront or to question. He followed him the way men follow each other in confined spaces, with the accumulated habit of proximity. He stood beside Mack at the fence for several minutes before either of them spoke. What Mack said eventually was not addressed to the witness. It was not addressed to anyone in the yard. It was addressed to something the witness did not try to identify. 14 years, Mack said, and I didn't know there was something like that. He did not say this with defeat in his voice, by the witness's account. He did not say it with anger or with the specific bitterness of a man recalibrating a self-image he had built too carefully to revise without cost. He said it with something that the witness, speaking about it years later, described as the tone of a man who has just discovered that a room he has lived in for a long time has a window he never noticed. Not destroyed. Expanded, Bruce Lee left the facility at 2:23 p.m. He spoke to no members of the press about the encounter because he was not asked, the film crew had not captured it and did not report it. He did not speak about it in any recorded interview. What he said privately, in the car leaving the facility, to the one crew member who had been close enough to partially observe what had occurred, this is the sentence that was not recorded in any book and has not appeared in any biography. He said, "A man who asks to see it again is not afraid of what it means." He said nothing else on the subject for the remainder of the drive. There are men who are powerful within the systems that have made them powerful and who mistake the system for the truth. This is not weakness. It is the natural consequence of experience that has been, within its own context, entirely consistent. Darnell Mack had learned everything he knew about confrontation inside a system where the lessons were real and the consequences were real and the knowledge was earned through a process that no one could reasonably dismiss. He was not wrong about what he knew. He was wrong about the boundaries of what he knew. He did not know where his knowledge stopped and the unexplored territory began. This is the specific form of limitation that appears in every closed system, in every discipline, in every life that is long enough and contained enough to mistake its walls for the edge of the world. What Bruce Lee gave him on that asphalt, in that heat, in front of 47 witnesses, was not a defeat. A defeat would have been less useful. A defeat can be absorbed and filed under the category of exceptional circumstances. He was stronger that day, I was slower, the ground was different, conditions were unusual. A defeat can be survived without revision. What Lee gave him was something that could not be filed or absorbed without first being understood. He gave him an experience that exceeded the category system Mack had built to contain it. He showed him a room his map did not include. And Mack asked to see it again. There is more honor in those 3 words than in 41 undefeated confrontations, because asking to see it again requires the admission that there is something you have not yet seen. And that admission, which costs a man of Darnell Mack's specific construction and specific history more than it would cost most people, is the first and only door that leads from a closed system into an open one. What happens when a man who has never been wrong discovers that wrong and right are not the only 2 positions available to a person? That there is also the position of a man who is standing at the edge of what he knows, looking at the territory beyond it, and choosing to look harder rather than turning back. That is the question this story answers. Not in theory. In 44 seconds on cracked asphalt in the California summer of 1971, In the next episode of this series, we go to a film set in Hong Kong in 1972, where a director with 30 years of experience in action cinema made a decision about a single 5-second sequence that Bruce Lee responded to in a way the director did not expect, and which changed the way action is filmed in every country in every language to this day. A 5-second sequence, 30 years of experience, and one conversation that no one on the set ever forgot. What a man knows is a room he built himself. What he does not yet know is not a ceiling. It is a wall he has not yet chosen to walk through.